In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where countless alien civilizations bow before the might of the Zephyrian Empire, one simple human gesture would shatter millennia of established power. When Captain Sarah Chun stepped aboard the flagship of Queen Vexera, the most feared ruler in known space, she carried with her something no alien had ever possessed: the audacity to refuse a royal command. What started as a routine diplomatic mission would become the moment that changed everything, not through weapons or warfare, but through a single act of defiance that would reveal the one thing the galaxy's most advanced species had forgotten: the power of standing your ground when everyone expects you to kneel. The aliens thought they knew humans. They were wrong. The transport ship Endeavour drifted through the asteroid field like a minnow among sleeping giants. Captain Sarah Chun pressed her palm against the reinforced viewport, watching the massive Zephyrian dreadnought grow larger with each passing moment. The alien vessel stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull gleaming with an organic sheen that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "Still time to turn back, Captain," Lieutenant Marcus Torres said from behind her, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken concern. The diplomatic corps could send someone else, someone more expendable. Sarah turned away from the viewport, her reflection briefly caught in the metallic surface. A woman in her mid-30s with steel-gray eyes and prematurely silver hair, earned through 15 years of navigating the treacherous waters of interstellar politics. "The Zephyrians specifically requested me, Marcus, after what happened at the Kepler Station incident. I'm apparently the only human they're willing to negotiate with." The Kepler Station incident. Even thinking about it made Sarah's jaw tighten. 6 months ago, a Zephyrian patrol had accidentally destroyed a human research outpost, claiming the scientists were conducting illegal weapons research. The evidence suggested otherwise, but with the Zephyrian Empire controlling over 200 star systems and possessing technology that made human weapons look like slingshots, the Earth Coalition had little choice but to seek diplomatic resolution. "Approaching Docking Bay 7, announced Ensign Kim from the pilot seat. "They're transmitting docking protocols now. Captain, these approach vectors, they're not following any standard we know. It's like they want us to thread a needle while blindfolded." Sarah moved to the pilot station and studied the holographic display. The Zephyrian ship's docking bay was buried deep within its structure, accessible only through a narrow channel that required precise maneuvering. It was clearly a defensive measure, forcing any approaching vessel to remain vulnerable for an extended period. "They're testing us," she said, "seeing if we're skilled enough to deserve their attention, or if we'll embarrass ourselves before we even get aboard." The Endeavour glided through the channel with practiced precision. Sarah had insisted on bringing her best pilot, and Kim had trained for months in simulators, studying every available recording of Zephyrian ship architecture. As they passed through energy barriers and scanning fields, Sarah could feel the weight of alien sensors examining every molecule of their ship. The docking bay itself was vast enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the Endeavour. Bioluminescent strips along the walls provided an eerie blue-green glow, and the air shimmered with atmospheric processors that analyzed and adjusted the environment in real time. As the transport settled onto the designated platform, Sarah could see figures moving in the shadows beyond the docking area. "Atmospheric composition is compatible," Kim reported. "Oxygen-nitrogen mix, 21% O2, standard pressure. Temperature is holding steady at 22 degrees Celsius. Almost like they want us to be comfortable," Marcus observed. "That's not what the briefings led me to expect." Sarah checked her sidearm one final time, though she knew it would be useless against Zephyrian technology. The weapon was more of a psychological comfort than a practical tool. "Remember the protocols. No sudden movements. Maintain eye contact only when spoken to directly, and under no circumstances touch any Zephyrian without explicit permission. Their skin secretes toxins that can kill a human in minutes." The airlock cycled through its sequence, and the outer door slid open with a whisper of escaping air. Sarah stepped onto the alien deck, her boots making soft, clicking sounds against the organic metal flooring. The gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth's standard, and there was a subtle vibration running through the ship's structure, as if the vessel itself were alive. A delegation of Zephyrians waited for them in the bay. Sarah had seen recordings and holographic representations before, but experiencing their presence in person was something entirely different. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies elongated and graceful, with 4 arms that moved with fluid precision. Their skin had a crystalline quality, shifting between deep purple and midnight blue depending on the angle of observation. Most striking were their eyes, large, multifaceted organs that seemed to see everything at once. The lead Zephyrian stepped forward, and Sarah recognized the ceremonial markings that indicated high rank. "I am General Kethmore of the 7th Fleet. You are the human called Chun." It wasn't a question. Sarah inclined her head in the gesture that intelligence reports indicated was appropriate for acknowledging a superior officer. "I am Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Coalition Diplomatic Corps. I'm honored to meet you, General." Honor. Kethmore seemed to taste the word. An interesting concept from a species that abandoned 3 of its colonies to save resources for military expansion. The bar was clearly intended to provoke a response, but Sarah had dealt with hostile negotiators before. Every species makes difficult choices when faced with limited resources, General. I'm here to discuss preventing future conflicts, not relitigating past decisions. Kethmore's eyes shifted color slightly. Cycling through what Sarah had been told indicated mild approval. "You will follow me to the reception chamber. There you will wait until Queen Vexera determines whether you are worthy of her attention." The walk through the ship's corridors was a lesson in Zephyrian superiority. The walls displayed constantly shifting patterns that Sarah realized were technical readouts and status displays, but in a format so advanced that human technology couldn't even begin to interpret the data. Crew members they passed moved with purpose and efficiency, barely acknowledging the human visitors. The reception chamber was a circular room with a domed ceiling that displayed what appeared to be a real-time view of local space. Stars wheeled overhead, and Sarah could see the distant glow of inhabited systems. The floor was transparent, revealing the void below, creating the unsettling impression of floating in space. "You will wait here," Kethmore announced. "Do not touch anything. Do not attempt to leave. The Queen will decide your fate when she chooses." As the general departed, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts and the vast emptiness displayed around her. The psychological impact was clear. She was a tiny, insignificant creature suspended in the cosmos, entirely dependent on alien goodwill for survival. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then, too, Sarah remained standing, knowing that showing weakness or impatience would be noted and reported. Marcus and Kim waited with her, their tension evident despite their professional composure. When the chamber's entrance finally dilated, Sarah felt her breath catch. Queen Vexera entered the room like a force of nature. She stood 4 meters tall, her skin displaying complex patterns that shifted and flowed like living art. Her crown wasn't a separate object, but seemed to be grown from her skull itself, forming spiraling structures that caught and reflected light in mesmerizing ways. But it was her eyes that truly commanded attention. Where other Zephyrians had large, multifaceted organs, the Queen's eyes were different, older, deeper, with an intensity that seemed to look directly into Sarah's soul. "So," the Queen said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Sarah's chest, "this is the human who believes she can negotiate with the Zephyrian Empire." Sarah straightened, but didn't bow. Intelligence reports had been clear that Zephyrians interpreted bowing as submission, and submission meant the negotiation was over before it began. "Your Majesty, I come seeking dialogue between our peoples." "Dialogue." Queen Vexera circled Sarah slowly, studying her from every angle. "Your species destroyed itself twice before achieving spaceflight. You wage war against your own kind over resources that could be shared. You poison your homeworld and then spread to poison others. Why should the Zephyrian Empire waste time on dialogue with such creatures? Because, Sarah said carefully, diversity of thought and approach has always led to stronger solutions. What seems obvious to one species might be invisible to another. The challenges facing all of us, resource scarcity, territorial expansion, technological advancement. These are problems that benefit from multiple perspectives. The Queen stopped directly in front of Sarah. Up close, her alien nature was even more pronounced. Her skin wasn't just colored differently, it was structured differently, with microscopic scales that caught light and created depth. Her breathing was barely perceptible, and her four arms moved independently, each apparently capable of complex tasks without conscious direction. Interesting words from a species that has contributed nothing to galactic civilization, Queen Vexera said. Your people have been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. We have ruled among the stars for over 50,000 years. What could you possibly offer us that we have not already perfected? This was the moment Sarah had prepared for during months of briefings and strategy sessions. The human delegation had identified this challenge as inevitable, and their response would determine whether negotiations continued or ended in failure. Your Majesty, may I ask you a question? The Queen's eyes shifted slightly, cycling through colors Sarah couldn't identify. You may ask, in 50,000 years of galactic civilization, have the Zephyrians ever encountered a problem they couldn't solve through superior technology or military force? Silence stretched between them. Sarah could feel Marcus and Kim's tension, but she kept her focus entirely on the Queen. There have been challenges, Queen Vexera admitted finally. Then perhaps, Sarah said, the value humans offer isn't in our technology or our military might. Perhaps it's in our approach to problems. We're young enough to still believe in impossible solutions. We haven't learned yet that some things can't be done. The Queen moved closer, close enough that Sarah could smell something like ozone and growing things. Remove your helmet, she commanded. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. The request made no sense. She wasn't wearing a helmet. But then she realized what the Queen was really asking. In Zephyrian culture, warriors and diplomats wore ceremonial headpieces that indicated their rank and allegiances. The Queen was asking Sarah to remove her metaphorical helmet, to abandon the protection of her official status, and speak as herself, not as a representative of humanity. It was a test, and possibly a trap. If Sarah spoke too freely, she could damage human-Zephyrian relations beyond repair. But if she refused, the Queen would consider her a coward, and negotiations would end immediately. Sarah looked directly into those ancient, alien eyes. I serve the Earth Coalition, Your Majesty, but I also serve the cause of peace between our peoples. What would you like to know? The Queen's expression was unreadable, but her skin patterns shifted to configurations Sarah had never seen in any of the briefing materials. She was entering uncharted territory now, with no guidance except her own judgment and years of experience reading dangerous situations. Tell me, Queen Vexera said softly, what you really think of my people. The question hung in the air like a blade. Sarah realized that this moment would determine not just the success of her mission, but possibly the future relationship between two species. The truth could be offensive or insulting. A lie would be detected and punished. She chose a third option, honest complexity. Your people fascinate and terrify me, Sarah said. You've built a civilization that spans galaxies, achieved technological advances that seem like magic to us, and created art and architecture that takes my breath away. But you've also become so advanced that you've forgotten what it's like to struggle, to fail, to need help from others. That makes you dangerous to species like mine, because you can't understand our perspective or predict our actions. The Queen's four arms moved in what Sarah recognized as surprise. You believe we cannot understand you. I believe you've forgotten how to understand us, Sarah corrected. When you've had superior technology for 50,000 years, when you've never faced a problem you couldn't solve through force or intellect, when you've never needed to ask another species for help, how could you understand what it's like to be young and weak and desperate. Queen Vexera was completely still now, her skin patterns frozen in configurations that seemed almost offensive. And what would you have us learn from your weakness and desperation? That sometimes the impossible solution comes from someone who doesn't know it's impossible, Sarah said. That innovation often comes from necessity. That the question, what if we tried something completely different, can be more powerful than 1,000 years of refined technique. The reception chamber fell silent except for the subtle sounds of the ship's systems. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, and she wondered if the Zephyrians could hear it too. She had said what she believed, and now she would discover whether honesty had been the right choice. Queen Vexera stepped back, her forearms moving in complex gestures that Sarah couldn't interpret. When she spoke again, her voice carried different harmonics, suggesting either anger or intrigue. You speak of impossible solutions, human Sarah-chun. Very well. We shall see if your species can provide one. Queen Vexera gestured toward a section of the chamber wall, and it flowed apart like liquid metal, revealing a corridor that hadn't existed moments before. Follow me, Captain Shun. Your companions will remain here. Sarah glanced at Marcus and Kim, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in their faces. Separating the diplomatic party went against every protocol in the book, but refusing a direct command from the Queen would end negotiations immediately. Your Majesty, my security officer, will remain here, the Queen repeated, her skin patterns shifting to what Sarah recognized as mild irritation. You asked to remove your helmet, human. This requires you to walk without the protection of your subordinates. The metaphor was becoming literal. Sarah nodded to Marcus, hoping her expression conveyed both confidence and caution. I'll return shortly. She followed Queen Vexera through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked. The walls displayed flowing patterns that might have been artistic or functional. With Zephyrian technology, there was rarely a distinction. Other crew members they encountered performed elaborate gestures of respect as the Queen passed, their skin patterns synchronizing in ways that created ripples of color along the hallway. Your people believe in individual achievement, the Queen said as they walked. Each human considers themselves the center of their own story, the hero of their own narrative. This is why you struggle with hierarchy and cooperation. Sarah considered the observation carefully. It was both an insight and a criticism and probably a test. Individual drive can lead to innovation and breakthrough discoveries. But you're right that it can also create problems with large-scale coordination. What about Zephyrian society? How do you balance individual will with collective need? We evolved beyond individual will millennia ago, Queen Vexera replied. Each Zephyrian is connected to the collective consciousness of our people through neural links implanted at birth. We share knowledge, emotions, and decisions instantaneously across our entire civilization. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the Queen was telling the truth, then every Zephyrian she met was simultaneously an individual and a representative of their entire species. Every conversation, every negotiation, every diplomatic exchange was being experienced by billions of minds simultaneously. That's incredible, Sarah managed, but also terrifying. What happens to personal privacy? Individual creativity? The right to be wrong. They entered a vast chamber that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. The walls curved away into infinity, and floating platforms contained equipment and displays that Sarah couldn't begin to comprehend. At the center of the room stood a structure that looked like a crystalline tree, its branches reaching toward a ceiling that might have been kilometers overhead. Those concepts become obsolete when perfection is achievable, the Queen said. Why preserve the right to be wrong when you can simply be correct? Why value individual creativity when collective intelligence can generate optimal solutions to any problem? Sarah stopped walking, forcing the Queen to turn and face her. Because sometimes the wrong answer leads to a discovery that the right answer would never find. Because individual creativity can produce solutions that collective intelligence would reject as impossible or inefficient. Because the right to be wrong is the right to be human. Queen Vexera's skin patterns shifted through configurations Sarah had never seen, cycling rapidly between colors and shapes. You defend imperfection as if it were valuable. I defend it because it is valuable, Sarah said. Your Majesty, you said the Zephyrians have faced challenges they couldn't solve. May I ask what kind of challenges? The Queen was silent for long moments, her four arms moving in what appeared to be an internal debate. Finally, she gestured toward the crystalline structure at the chamber center. Approach the archive, human. But know that what you learn here will change how you see both our species and your own. Sarah walked toward the crystal tree, feeling a subtle vibration in the air around her. As she drew closer, images began to form within the structure's branches, scenes of space battles, dying planets, and alien faces twisted with terror. For 50,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire has been the dominant force in this galaxy, the Queen said. We have conquered or absorbed over 300 species. We have ended wars, prevented famines, and brought order to chaos. But in doing so, we have also eliminated something that we are only now beginning to understand was valuable. The images in the crystal shifted, showing empty space where star systems should have been. Dead worlds stripped of all resources. Vast monuments built from the bones of extinct civilizations. We achieved perfection at the cost of diversity, Queen Vexera continued. Our collective consciousness became so refined, so optimized, that began rejecting any input that wasn't already known to be correct. We stopped learning. We stopped growing. We stopped evolving. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. You've stagnated. Worse than stagnated. We've begun to decline. Our technology is still supreme, but it's based on knowledge gathered thousands of years ago. Our strategies are still effective, but they're variations on approaches we developed millennia past. Our art, our philosophy, our very thoughts have become echo chambers of ancient wisdom. The images in the crystal now showed Zephyrian cities that looked identical across dozens of worlds. Massive structures that were undeniably impressive but seemed somehow sterile and repetitive. Art that was technically perfect but emotionally flat. 3 centuries ago, our scientists identified what they termed civilization fatigue, the point at which a species becomes so successful that it loses the ability to adapt to new challenges. We had conquered every external threat, solved every technical problem, and absorbed every useful innovation from conquered species. We had become perfect, and perfection, it turns out, is a form of death. Sarah approached one of the crystal branches and saw her own reflection multiplied in its facets. That's why you're interested in humanity. We're unpredictable. You are chaotic, Queen Vexera corrected. Inefficient, irrational, and prone to making decisions that our collective consciousness would reject immediately. But in that chaos, you occasionally produce outcomes that our models cannot predict or replicate. A new set of images appeared in the crystal, showing human achievements, art that defied conventional beauty, scientific discoveries made through apparent accidents, military victories achieved through tactics that should have failed catastrophically. The Kepler Station incident was a test, the Queen said. We needed to observe how humans respond to unprovoked aggression against a defenseless target. Our models predicted you would either surrender immediately or launch a suicidal counterattack. Instead, you did something we hadn't considered. You sought dialogue while simultaneously preparing for war, creating multiple contingency plans that adapted based on our responses. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. You've been studying us. For over 200 years, every human colony, every space battle, every diplomatic negotiation has been monitored and analyzed. Your species consistently produces outcomes that defy logical prediction. You solve problems by trying solutions that shouldn't work. You survive situations where survival is mathematically impossible. You create beauty from chaos and find hope in despair. The Queen moved to stand beside Sarah at the crystal tree. Up close, her alien nature was even more pronounced. Her breathing created harmonics that seemed to resonate with the chamber itself, and her skin displayed patterns so complex they might have been mathematical equations. But observation is insufficient, Queen Vexera continued. To truly understand human unpredictability, we need to interact with it directly. We need to see if your chaotic approach can solve problems that our perfected methods cannot. What kind of problems? The images in the crystal shifted again, showing star maps with vast empty regions marked in red. The Void Plague, the Queen said, a phenomenon that began appearing in distant galaxies approximately 1,000 years ago. It spreads from system to system, converting matter and energy into absolute nothingness. Not destruction, nullification. Complete removal from existence. Sarah stared at the images, trying to comprehend the scale of what she was seeing. Entire solar systems simply gone. Not destroyed, not converted, not consumed, erased as if they had never existed. We've lost 3 tributary civilizations to the Void Plague, Queen Vexera said. Each time, our scientists and military commanders developed what they believed were perfect responses. Evacuation protocols that could relocate entire populations. Defensive barriers that should have contained the spread. Weapons that could theoretically counter the nullification effect. Every solution was logically sound and technically flawless. But they didn't work. They failed because the Void Plague doesn't follow the physical laws that our solutions assumed were absolute. It operates according to principles that our collective consciousness cannot model or predict. We need a different approach, an approach based on irrationality and impossible assumptions. Sarah turned away from the crystal, her mind reeling with the implications. You want humans to solve a problem that the most advanced civilization in the galaxy can't handle. We want to see if human unpredictability can find solutions where Zephyrian logic has failed, the Queen corrected. But this requires more than observation. It requires genuine collaboration between our species. And if we can't solve it, Queen Vexera's skin patterns shifted to configurations that seemed almost mournful. Then, the Void Plague will eventually reach this galaxy. Our estimates suggest we have between 500 and 1,000 years before it arrives. When it does, it will erase everything. Every world, every species, every achievement of the last 50 million years of galactic civilization. The weight of the revelation settled on Sarah like a physical pressure. Everything she thought she understood about the meeting had been wrong. This wasn't about trade disputes or territorial boundaries. This was about the survival of entire civilizations. Why tell me this? She asked. Why not approach the Earth Coalition officially, share your data, ask for formal cooperation? Because formal cooperation would produce formal solutions, the Queen said. The Earth Coalition would assign their best scientists and strategists to analyze our data and develop responses based on human military and scientific doctrine. They would try to think like us, to match our logical approaches with human variations. That's not what we need. Sarah was beginning to understand. You need someone who won't try to be logical. Someone who'll approach the problem from a completely different angle. We need someone who will remove their helmet, Queen Vexera said. Someone who will abandon the protection of conventional thinking and risk being completely wrong in pursuit of an impossible solution. The challenge was both flattering and terrifying. Sarah had spent her career learning to navigate complex political situations through careful analysis and measured responses. Now she was being asked to abandon everything she'd learned about problem-solving and trust in chaos and irrationality. What exactly are you proposing? A trial period. 6 of our standard months for you to study the Void Plague data and develop potential solutions using whatever approach humans consider appropriate. You will have access to our archives, our research facilities, and our simulation capabilities. In exchange, we will provide the Earth Coalition with technological assistance for your most pressing challenges: energy generation, environmental restoration, and space travel efficiency. It was an incredible offer. The technological gap between humans and Zephyrians was so vast that even limited assistance could advance human civilization by centuries. But Sarah could sense there was more to the proposal. What aren't you telling me? Queen Vexera's forearms moved in what might have been approval or resignation. The research will require you to work directly with our collective consciousness. You will need to interface with the same neural networks that connect all Zephyrian minds. For a human, this process is unprecedented, dangerous, unknown. Our scientists cannot predict how individual human consciousness will interact with our collective mental structure. The interface might enhance your cognitive abilities beyond anything your species has experienced, or it might fragment your sense of self beyond recovery. There is no way to test the process safely. The first attempt will be the experiment. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Queen was asking her to risk her sanity, possibly her life, on the chance that human irrationality could solve a problem that threatened the entire galaxy. Why me specifically? Why not offer this opportunity to human scientists or military strategists? Because you already removed your helmet, Queen Vexera said. In our first conversation, when I asked you to speak honestly, you abandoned the safety of diplomatic protocols and risked offense to tell the truth. You demonstrated the willingness to sacrifice personal security for the possibility of genuine communication. The compliment felt more like a trap. Sarah realized that her honest answers earlier had been a test, and by passing it, she had volunteered herself for something far more dangerous than standard diplomatic negotiations. I need to discuss this with my team, and with Earth Coalition leadership. Of course, but know that time is not unlimited. The Void Plague advances constantly, and our window for finding solutions grows smaller with each passing year. We cannot wait indefinitely for human bureaucracy to reach consensus. Queen Vexera gestured toward the chamber's exit, which had reformed while they spoke. Return to your companions. Consider what you have learned. But remember that some opportunities appear only once in the history of a species. As they walked back through the shifting corridors, Sarah's mind raced with questions and implications. The Queen had revealed information that changed humanity's place in the galaxy, offered assistance that could solve Earth's most critical problems, and proposed a collaboration that could save entire civilizations from extinction. But the price might be her own mind and possibly her life. When they reached the reception chamber, Marcus and Kim looked up with relief and concern. Sarah's expression must have conveyed the magnitude of what she'd learned, because Marcus immediately moved to her side. Captain, what happened? Sarah looked at her team, then at Queen Vexera, who watched with those ancient, unreadable eyes. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours. The simple diplomatic mission had become something that would require decisions far beyond her authority to make. But first, she had to find the courage to explain to Earth Coalition leadership that the fate of the galaxy might depend on one human's willingness to risk everything on an impossible gamble. The emergency session of the Earth Coalition Council convened 12 hours after Sarah's return from the Zephyrian flagship. The massive conference chamber in Geneva buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from every major Earth nation and colony world took their seats around the circular table. Sarah sat in the witness chair, having delivered her preliminary report, and watched as humanity's leaders grappled with information that challenged everything they thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Chancellor Maria Santos of the Brazilian Federation spoke first, her voice cutting through the murmur of side conversations. Captain Shun, you're asking us to believe that the most powerful civilization in known space is offering to share their technology because they need help from humans? That's correct, Chancellor. The Zephyrians have reached what they call civilization fatigue. They've become so optimized that they can no longer innovate effectively. They need our unpredictability. Director James Walsh of the North American Union leaned forward, his expression skeptical. And in exchange for this help, they want you to undergo an experimental procedure that could destroy your mind. Sarah kept her voice steady despite the tension in the room. They want me to interface directly with their collective consciousness to study a threat called the Void Plague. The risks are unknown because the procedure has never been attempted with a human subject. Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Asian Federation pulled up holographic displays showing force estimates and ship deployments. Captain, I've reviewed your tactical assessment of their flagship. A single Zephyrian dreadnought could destroy our entire fleet. If this is some kind of trap, it's not a trap, Admiral, Sarah interrupted. At least, not in the way you're thinking. The Queen was genuinely desperate. I could see it in her expressions, her body language. She wasn't trying to deceive me. She was trying to convince me. President Eleanor Harrison of the European Alliance tapped her fingers on the table, a gesture Sarah recognized as deep thought. Let's assume Captain Chin's assessment is correct. The Zephyrians are facing an existential threat and need our help. What guarantees do we have that they'll honor their part of the agreement? Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Colonial Research Council raised her hand. More importantly, what evidence do we have that this void plague actually exists? For all we know, this could be an elaborate test of human psychology. Sarah had anticipated these questions during the long flight back to Earth. The Queen showed me archived data spanning thousands of years. The level of detail and consistency would be impossible to fabricate. Entire star systems have been erased, not destroyed, but completely removed from existence. If the Zephyrians have technology that can simulate that kind of phenomenon convincingly, then we're already so outmatched that resistance would be pointless. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah could see the conflict in their faces, the desire to believe in the incredible opportunity balanced against the fear of potential catastrophe. Chancellor Santos spoke again. What exactly would this technological assistance entail? Specifically, what problems could they help us solve? Sarah referenced her notes, though she had memorized every detail. Queen Vexera mentioned 3 areas: energy generation, environmental restoration, and space travel efficiency. Based on what I observed of their technology, we're talking about fusion reactors that could power entire continents, atmospheric processors that could reverse climate change within decades, and propulsion systems that could reduce interstellar travel times from decades to months. The numbers were staggering. Dr. Vasquez pulled up economic projections on her display. The energy technology alone could eliminate resource scarcity across all Earth territories. Environmental restoration could make every colony world self-sufficient. And faster space travel would open up dozens of new systems for exploration and settlement. It could also make us completely dependent on alien technology we don't understand, Director Walsh pointed out. What happens when they decide to withdraw their support? Fleet Admiral Tanaka nodded grimly. We'd be like children playing with weapons we can't repair or replace. It's a recipe for eventual subjugation. Sarah leaned forward in her chair. Admiral, with respect, we're already subjugated. The Zephyrians could conquer Earth tomorrow if they chose to. The only reason they haven't is that conquest doesn't serve their interests. They need us to remain independent and unpredictable. President Harrison studied the holographic displays showing comparative technology levels. Captain Chun, in your professional opinion, is this our only chance for advancement? Are we doomed to remain a minor species without their assistance? The question struck to the heart of humanity's situation. Sarah had seen enough of Zephyrian technology to understand the gap that separated the species. Honestly, we might eventually develop comparable technology on our own, but it would take centuries or millennia. The Zephyrians have a 50,000-year head start. This offer represents a chance to close that gap in a few generations instead of a few hundred. Dr. Vasquez raised another concern. What about the neural interface procedure? Even if Captain Chun survives it intact, we have no idea what kind of information the Zephyrians might be able to extract from her mind. State secrets, military capabilities, personal information about Earth leadership. That's a valid concern, Sarah acknowledged. But consider the alternative. If the void plague is real and we refuse to help, the Zephyrians will eventually fall to it. When that happens, humanity becomes the most advanced species in a galaxy under threat from a phenomenon we don't understand and can't fight. Chancellor Santos pulled up star charts showing the expansion of human territory. How long did Queen Vexera say we have before this void plague reaches our galaxy. Between 500 and 1,000 years, based on their calculations. That's beyond the scope of current strategic planning, Admiral Tanaka observed. We're talking about threats that will face our descendants 20 or 30 generations from now, which makes it easy to dismiss, President Harrison said quietly. But if Captain Shun is right, those descendants will curse us for ignoring a threat we could have helped address. The debate continued for hours, with representatives raising questions about implementation, oversight, and contingency planning. Sarah answered what she could and acknowledged what she didn't know. The uncertainty was maddening, but it was also the reality of the situation. Finally, Chancellor Santos called for a recess to allow for private consultations among the national delegations. Sarah was escorted to a waiting room where Marcus and Kim were reviewing technical specifications. "How do you think it's going?" Marcus asked. Sarah poured herself coffee from the dispenser, noting that her hands were steadier than she felt. "They're scared, which is appropriate, given what we're asking them to approve. But they're also intrigued by the possibilities. Are you really willing to go through with a neural interface?" Kim asked, even knowing it could kill you or drive you insane. Sarah had been asking herself the same question since leaving the Zephyrian ship. "Kim, I've spent my career believing that diplomacy can solve problems that military force can't touch. This is the ultimate test of that belief. If I'm not willing to take the risk myself, how can I ask others to trust in the process?" "That's not really an answer," Marcus pointed out. Sarah smiled despite the tension. "No, it's not. The honest answer is that I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of the alternative. If the Zephyrians are right about the void plague, then doing nothing guarantees eventual extinction for every species in the galaxy. At least this way, there's a chance." When the session reconvened, the mood in the chamber had shifted. The representatives had reached some kind of consensus during their private discussions. President Harrison spoke for the group. "Captain Shun, the Council has voted to authorize preliminary negotiations with the Zephyrians. We're prepared to offer a limited partnership focused on the void plague research, with specific conditions." Sarah felt relief and apprehension in equal measure. "What conditions?" Chancellor Santos consulted her notes. "First, the neural interface procedure will be monitored by human medical personnel with the right to intervene if your life is in immediate danger. Second, all technological assistance will be provided with complete documentation and training, not just finished products. Third, the partnership will be reviewed every 6 months with the option to withdraw if we determine the risks outweigh the benefits. And fourth, Admiral Tanaka added, you'll be accompanied by a full diplomatic and scientific team. If the Zephyrians want human cooperation, they'll get the full spectrum of human expertise." Dr. Vasquez pulled up personnel files. "We're assembling a team of our best xenobiologists, theoretical physicists, and cognitive specialists. If this neural interface procedure provides access to Zephyrian knowledge, we want to ensure maximum benefit from the experience." The conditions were reasonable, and Sarah suspected Queen Vexera would find them acceptable. The Zephyrians wanted human unpredictability, and a larger team would provide more diverse perspectives. "There's one more thing," President Harrison said. "Captain Shun, you volunteered for an extremely dangerous mission in service to all humanity. The Council wants you to know that regardless of the outcome, your contribution will be remembered. We're also authorizing immediate promotions for your entire crew and hazard compensation for your family." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She had been so focused on the strategic implications that she hadn't considered the personal cost. "Thank you. That means more than I can express." Director Walsh activated a secure communication link. "We'll transmit our response to the Zephyrians within the hour." "Captain, how long do you think you'll need to prepare for the mission?" "The team assembly and briefing will take at least a week," Dr. Vasquez said, "plus travel time to reach the Zephyrian research facility." Sarah considered the timeline. The Queen emphasized that time was critical. "I recommend we aim for departure within 10 days. "Agreed," President Harrison said. "Captain Shun, you'll have full authority to negotiate specific terms with the Zephyrians, but remember that you're representing all of humanity. Your decisions will affect our species for generations to come. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Sarah remained in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just been decided. In less than 10 days, she would return to the Zephyrians and volunteer for a procedure that could fundamentally alter her consciousness, all in pursuit of a solution to a threat that might not reach them for another millennium. Marcus approached her chair. "Captain, there's something you should know. While you were briefing the council, we received a message from the Zephyrian ship." Sarah looked up sharply. "What kind of message?" "Personal communication directed specifically to you," Kim said, joining them. "Queen Vexera wants to meet privately before the formal mission begins. She says there are aspects of the neural interface that she couldn't discuss in front of the collective consciousness." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. What aspects? She didn't specify, but she did say that once you undergo the procedure, there may be no going back. Not just to your previous mental state, but to being purely human. Sarah stared at the empty council chamber, realizing that the most important decisions still lay ahead of her. The council had authorized the mission, but Queen Vexera was suggesting that the neural interface involved changes that went beyond what they had discussed. She was about to discover that removing her helmet meant more than abandoning conventional thinking. It meant potentially abandoning her humanity itself. The private meeting took place in a neutral location, a small research station at the edge of the Tau Ceti system, operated jointly by human and Zephyrian scientists studying gravitational anomalies. Sarah arrived alone, despite protests from her security team, carrying only a personal communicator and her diplomatic credentials. Queen Vexera was waiting in the station's central laboratory, her towering form silhouetted against massive viewports that showed the orange glow of Tau Ceti's surface. She stood motionless, her skin patterns cycling through configurations that seemed almost meditative in their slow, regular shifts. "You came," the Queen said without turning around. "You said there were things I needed to know before the neural interface. Things you couldn't discuss in front of your people." Queen Vexera finally faced her, and Sarah was struck by how different the alien ruler appeared in the subdued lighting. Her crystalline skin seemed more translucent, revealing deeper structures that pulsed with their own rhythm. Her eyes, those massive multifaceted organs, seemed less intimidating and more tired. "Tell me, Captain Shun, what do you believe consciousness is?" The question was unexpected. Sarah had prepared for technical discussions about the neural interface procedure, not philosophical debates about the nature of awareness. "I suppose it's the experience of being aware of yourself and your surroundings. The ability to think, feel, and make decisions based on internal motivations and external circumstances. A reasonable definition from an individual perspective," the Queen said. "But what happens when consciousness becomes shared? When the boundaries between self and other dissolve completely?" Sarah felt a growing unease. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking." Queen Vexera moved to a control panel and activated a holographic display showing the structure of a Zephyrian brain. The organ was far more complex than any human neural system, with interconnected regions that seemed to extend beyond the physical boundaries of the skull. "This is what 50,000 years of collective consciousness has done to my people," the Queen said. "We are no longer truly individual beings. Each Zephyrian is more accurately described as a terminal in a vast neural network. We share thoughts, emotions, and decisions instantaneously across our entire species." The implications were staggering. Sarah studied the display, trying to comprehend what it meant to exist as part of a shared consciousness spanning billions of minds across hundreds of worlds. "That's incredible," she said. "But also terrifying?" Queen Vexera supplied. "Yes, it can be, especially for those who remember what individual thought felt like." Sarah looked up sharply. "You remember being individual?" "I'm old, even by Zephyrian standards. I predate the full integration of our collective consciousness by several centuries. I remember what it was like to be truly alone in my own mind, to have thoughts and feelings that belonged only to me. The Queen's skin patterns shifted to configurations Sarah had never seen, displaying complex emotions that seemed to exist outside normal Zephyrian expressions. Why are you telling me this? Because the neural interface will not simply allow you to access our collective knowledge, Queen Vexera said. It will integrate you into our shared consciousness. You will become, in every meaningful sense, part of the Zephyrian mental network. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. You're talking about assimilation. I'm talking about evolution, the Queen corrected. But evolution that comes at the cost of individual identity. Once the interface is established, you will still be Sarah Chun, but you will also be connected to every other consciousness in our network. You will know what they know, feel what they feel, and participate in collective decisions that affect our entire civilization. The laboratory seemed to spin around Sarah as the full implication sank in. That's not what you told the Earth Coalition. You described it as a research partnership, not permanent integration. Because permanent integration is what it will become, Queen Vexera said. The interface cannot be safely reversed once established. The neural pathways that connect you to our network will become permanent structures in your brain. You will remain human in body, but your consciousness will be fundamentally altered. Sarah moved to the viewport, staring out at the star that had become humanity's first foothold beyond Earth's solar system. Everything she had told the Coalition, all the assurances she had given about manageable risks, had been based on incomplete information. Why didn't you explain this from the beginning? Because your collective consciousness, what you call governments and institutions, would never have agreed to it, the Queen said. They would have viewed it as a trap or a form of conquest. But individual human consciousness has the capacity for choices that collective decision-making would reject. Sarah turned back to face the Queen. So you've been manipulating me from the beginning. I've been honest with you about what we need and what we can offer, Queen Vexera replied. But I have also been selective about when to reveal certain details. The question now is whether you are willing to proceed with full knowledge of the consequences. And if I refuse? The Queen's four arms moved in what might have been resignation. Then, the research into the Void Plague continues using purely Zephyrian methods, which have already proven inadequate. The technological assistance we promised to humanity will still be provided. We honor our agreements. But the chance for a truly innovative solution to an existential threat will be lost. Sarah paced the length of the laboratory, her mind racing through implications and alternatives. The Queen had revealed that the neural interface was essentially a one-way transformation that would fundamentally alter her consciousness. But she had also confirmed that it represented humanity's best chance to contribute to solving a threat that could eventually consume entire galaxies. What would happen to me personally? Would I still be able to interact with other humans normally? You would retain your individual personality and memories, Queen Vexera said. But you would also have access to the collective knowledge and experience of our entire species. You would understand concepts and perceive relationships that individual consciousness cannot grasp. In many ways, you would become more than human, or less than human, depending on your perspective. That is a judgment only you can make. Sarah stopped pacing and faced the Queen directly. Why are you giving me this choice? Why not simply proceed with the interface as originally planned? Queen Vexera's skin patterns shifted to configurations that seemed almost nostalgic. Because I remember what it was like to choose my own thoughts, to have privacy in my own mind, to be responsible only for my own decisions. I cannot take that away from another being without their full consent. The honesty was unexpected and profound. Sarah realized that Queen Vexera was offering her something the Queen herself no longer possessed, the right to choose her own form of consciousness. If I agree to the procedure, what happens to my relationships with other humans? Can I maintain friendships, romantic connections, family ties? Your emotional capacity will be enhanced, not diminished, the Queen said. You will be able to love and be loved, perhaps more deeply than before. But Those relationships will be complicated by your connection to billions of other minds. It will be challenging for purely individual consciousnesses to relate to you. Sarah considered her family back on Earth, her parents, her sister, the handful of close friends she had maintained despite the demands of her career. The procedure would essentially cut her off from normal human relationships, making her a bridge between two forms of consciousness that might be fundamentally incompatible. What about the research itself? What specific advantages would the neural interface provide in studying the void plague? The Queen activated new displays showing the phenomenon in detail. The void plague operates according to principles that our collective consciousness cannot model effectively because they contradict our understanding of physical reality. But individual consciousness, particularly human consciousness, approaches problems through intuition and pattern recognition that might identify solutions our logical methods would never consider. You want me to think like a human while having access to Zephyrian knowledge? Precisely. The interface would allow you to maintain individual decision-making processes while drawing on our accumulated understanding of physics, mathematics, and dimensional theory. It is a combination that has never existed before. Sarah studied the images of the void plague, watching entire star systems vanish into nothingness. The scale of the threat was beyond anything humanity had ever faced, but it was also beyond anything the Zephyrians had successfully addressed despite their advanced technology. How long would I have to make this decision? The research facility is already prepared. The neural interface procedure could be performed as soon as you are ready. But once it begins, there will be no opportunity to change your mind. Sarah felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She could return to Earth and recommend that the coalition reject the neural interface in favor of more conventional cooperation. The technological assistance alone would advance human civilization significantly, but the chance to help solve an existential threat to all galactic life would be lost. Alternatively, she could proceed with the interface knowing that it would fundamentally transform her consciousness and potentially cut her off from normal human relationships. She would become something new, no longer purely human, but not fully Zephyrian either. Queen Vexera, may I ask you a personal question? You may ask, do you regret the loss of individual consciousness? If you could choose to be purely individual again, would you? The Queen was silent for long moments, her skin patterns cycling through configurations that seemed to express complex internal conflict. There are aspects of collective consciousness that are magnificent. The ability to share experiences directly, to understand concepts through multiple perspectives simultaneously, to participate in decisions that draw on the wisdom of billions of minds. These are profound gifts. But there are also losses that I did not anticipate. The privacy of internal thought, the surprise of discovering new ideas through individual exploration, the simple pleasure of having emotions that belong only to you. These things have value that becomes apparent only after they are gone. Sarah nodded, understanding that the Queen was offering her both a warning and encouragement to choose carefully. I need time to think about this, and I need to discuss it with certain people. Of course, but remember that time is limited. The void plague advances constantly, and our window for finding solutions grows smaller with each passing day. As Sarah prepared to leave the research station, Queen Vexera approached her one final time. Captain Shun, regardless of your decision, I want you to know that your willingness to consider this sacrifice demonstrates the kind of courage that the galaxy needs. Whether you choose to maintain your individual consciousness or join our collective, you have already proven that humans possess something valuable that we have lost. What's that? The ability to risk everything for the possibility of helping others, even when the outcome is uncertain and the cost is personal. Sarah left the meeting with more questions than answers, but also with a clearer understanding of what was truly at stake. The choice before her was not just about research methods or technological cooperation. It was about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, and whether she was willing to sacrifice her humanity for the possibility of saving all sentient life in the galaxy. The decision would define not only her own future, but potentially the future of human-alien relations for generations to come. Sarah stood in the observation deck of the research facility, watching technicians make final preparations for the neural interface procedure. The Zephyrian installation floated in the void between galaxies, its crystalline structures catching light from distant stars and reflecting it in patterns that seemed to shift with their own intelligence. 3 weeks had passed since her private meeting with Queen Vexera. 3 weeks of consultations with Earth Coalition leadership, painful conversations with family members, and endless nights staring at star charts while wrestling with an impossible decision. In the end, it had been a message from her sister that decided her. Sarah, asterisk the transmission had said, asterisk I know you're trying to protect me by not explaining exactly what you're considering. But I've watched you your entire life, and I know that look in your eyes. You found something worth sacrificing everything for, haven't you? Whatever it is, I trust your judgment. Just try to come back to us, even if you're not quite the same person when you do. Asterisk Dr. Elena Vasquez approached from behind, her reflection visible in the observation window. The medical monitors are calibrated and ready. We'll be able to track your vital signs throughout the procedure, though we're not entirely sure what we'll be seeing. Sarah turned to face the xenobiologist who had become both colleague and friend during the preparation period. Any last-minute insights about what I'm about to experience? Based on our analysis of Zephyrian neural structure, the initial integration should feel like, imagine trying to listen to 1,000 conversations simultaneously while also participating in each one individually. Your brain will be processing input from billions of other minds while trying to maintain your own thought patterns. Encouraging, Sarah said dryly. Dr. Vasquez smiled despite the tension. The good news is that Zephyrian consciousness appears to be fundamentally organized. It's not chaotic. It's more like joining an incredibly complex, but well-structured organization. You'll find your place within the collective, and it will accommodate your individual perspective. And the bad news? The bad news is that we have no idea what finding your place actually means for human consciousness. You might maintain clear individual identity, or you might become so integrated that distinguishing between your thoughts and others becomes impossible. Sarah nodded, having expected that answer. The procedure was unprecedented, and uncertainty was unavoidable. Dr. Vasquez, I want you to know that whatever happens to me personally, the real value will be in what we learn. Make sure the data gets back to Earth, regardless of the outcome. Sarah, Dr. Vasquez hesitated, then continued. I need to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this? There are other approaches we could try. Slower methods that might achieve similar results without the personal risk. How long would those slower methods take? Years, possibly decades. Sarah looked back through the observation window at the vast emptiness between galaxies, imagining the void plague advancing through distant star systems, erasing entire civilizations from existence. Elena, we don't have decades. If Queen Vexera is right about the threat timeline, every year we delay is another year closer to galactic extinction. This is our chance to make a real difference. A soft chime indicated that the preparation phase was complete. Sarah made her way to the procedure chamber, where Queen Vexera waited alongside Zephyrian technicians whose skin patterns displayed focused concentration. The chamber itself was unlike anything in human technology. The walls seemed to be alive, with flowing patterns of light that responded to the presence of conscious minds. At the center of the room, a structure that looked like a combination of medical equipment and organic growth extended delicate tendrils toward a reclining chair designed for human physiology. Captain Chun, Queen Vexera said, the interface matrix is ready. Once the connection is established, you will begin experiencing input from our collective consciousness. The process will be gradual. Your mind will be given time to adapt to the increased information flow. Sarah settled into the chair, feeling the organic surfaces adjust to her body temperature and position. Monitoring devices placed by Dr. Vasquez displayed her vital signs on screens visible to the observation team. What should I expect in the first few minutes? Voices, the Queen said. Thousands of them, then millions, then billions. They will not be speaking to you directly. They will simply be the background of collective thought that all Zephyrians experience constantly. Your mind will learn to filter and focus on specific streams of consciousness. And if my mind can adapt, Queen Vexera's skin patterns shifted to what Sarah had learned indicated deep concern. Then, the connection will be severed immediately before permanent damage occurs. You will retain your individual consciousness, but you will also lose the opportunity to access our collective knowledge. Let's proceed. The Queen gestured to the technicians, who began activating systems that hummed with power Sarah could feel in her bones. The organic tendrils extended toward her head, moving with deliberate precision to make contact with specific points on her skull. The first sensation was warmth, spreading from the contact points throughout her nervous system. Then came a tingling that seemed to originate inside her brain itself, as if neural pathways were being gently stimulated and modified. Then the voices began. It started as a whisper, barely distinguishable from her own thoughts. Then it became a murmur, like conversation heard through walls. Then it became clear that she was listening to actual minds, thousands of them, engaged in activities across the Zephyrian Empire. Research Station Gamma 7 reporting successful completion of atmospheric analysis. Asterisk navigation correction required for supply. Convoy approaching Vextar Prime. Asterisk medical assessment indicates successful treatment of neural degradation in patient 47. Alpha. Asterisk the information flow increased exponentially. Sarah found herself aware of engineering projects on dozens of worlds, scientific discoveries being made in real time, military operations coordinating across vast distances, and cultural events celebrating achievements she was only beginning to understand. But beneath the specific activities, she became aware of something deeper, the fundamental structure of Zephyrian collective consciousness itself. It was organized like a vast library where every piece of information was instantly accessible to anyone who needed it, but also like a living organism where every part contributed to the health and growth of the whole. Sarah, Dr. Vasquez's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your neural activity is off the charts, but your vital signs are stable. How do you feel? Sarah tried to respond, but found that the concept of individual speech seemed suddenly primitive. Why use words when thoughts could be shared directly? Why limit communication to sequential sounds when entire concepts could be transmitted instantaneously? With effort, she forced herself to speak aloud. I can hear them. All of them. It's overwhelming but also amazing. There's so much knowledge, so much experience shared simultaneously. Can you access specific information about the Void Plague? Sarah focused her attention and immediately found herself connected to research streams dedicated to the phenomenon. She saw data collected over centuries, theoretical models that attempted to explain the nullification effect, and experimental approaches that had failed to contain or reverse the plague's advance. But she also saw something the Zephyrian collective had missed. Patterns in the data that suggested the Void Plague wasn't simply destroying matter and energy, but converting them into something else entirely. Something that existed outside normal space-time. It's not destruction, she said aloud, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. The Void Plague is translation. It's moving matter and energy from our dimensional framework into somewhere else. Queen Vexera stepped closer to the chair. Can you elaborate? Sarah felt her consciousness expanding, drawing on mathematical concepts that no individual human mind could have grasped, but that became clear when filtered through the collective intelligence of an entire civilization. Imagine space-time as a sheet of paper. Most phenomena, gravity, electromagnetism, even exotic effects like quantum entanglement, operate within the two-dimensional surface of the paper. But the Void Plague operates in 3 dimensions, folding the paper itself, moving sections of our reality into configurations that make them inaccessible from our dimensional perspective. The implications were staggering, and Sarah could feel the collective consciousness focusing its attention on her insights. Billions of minds began exploring the ramifications of dimensional translation, calculating possibilities that individual thought could never have considered. If that's accurate, Dr. Vasquez said from the observation area, then the missing star systems aren't destroyed. They're relocated to a different dimensional framework. Exactly, Sarah said, though her voice now seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. And if they're relocated rather than destroyed, then theoretically they could be returned to our dimensional framework using the correct approach. She felt the collective consciousness surge with excitement and possibility. Research streams that have been stagnant for centuries suddenly blazed with new activity as millions of minds began developing and testing theoretical approaches based on dimensional translation rather than direct confrontation. But Sarah also felt something else, her individual consciousness beginning to merge more completely with the collective. Her thoughts were becoming shared property, accessible to anyone within the network. Her memories, her emotions, her personal experiences were flowing into the vast repository of collective knowledge. Sarah, Queen Vexera said urgently, you need to maintain focus on your individual identity. Don't let the collective absorb you completely. With tremendous effort, Sarah reasserted her personal boundaries, imagining walls around her core self while maintaining connections to the shared knowledge base. It was like trying to remain a distinct drop of water while swimming in an ocean. I'm still here, she managed to say, but it's getting harder to remember where I end and the collective begins. That's normal for the integration process, the Queen assured her. The key is learning to participate in collective thought while maintaining individual decision-making capability. Sarah focused on the Void Plague research, using her human intuition to guide the collective's analytical capabilities. Together, they began developing an approach that no purely individual or purely collective consciousness could have achieved. The solution was elegant in its complexity. Instead of trying to prevent or destroy the dimensional translation effect, they would create a controlled translation that could move threatened systems to safe dimensional configurations before the Void Plague reached them, then return them to normal space-time after the threat had passed. It was a solution that required both human creativity and Zephyrian technical knowledge, neither of which would have been sufficient alone. The theoretical framework is sound, Sarah announced, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated with the entire collective consciousness. But implementation will require unprecedented cooperation between multiple species, not just Zephyrians and humans. Why? Queen Vexera asked. Sarah smiled, feeling the vast network of minds sharing her satisfaction at having found a workable solution. Because dimensional translation on this scale requires conscious minds to serve as anchor points in normal space-time. The more diverse the consciousness types, the more stable the anchoring effect. We'll need representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The collective consciousness erupted with activity as billions of minds began calculating resource requirements, identifying necessary technologies, and planning the diplomatic approaches that would be needed to convince dozens of species to cooperate in an unprecedented joint effort. Sarah felt herself becoming more integrated with each passing moment, but she also felt a deep satisfaction at having contributed something unique and valuable. Her human perspective had provided the key insight that made a solution possible, while the collective consciousness had provided the knowledge base necessary to develop that insight into a practical approach. Dr. Vasquez, she called out, her individual voice now accompanied by harmonic overtones from the collective, document everything you're observing. This integration process will be crucial for future human-Zephyrian cooperation. Sarah, are you still you? Sarah considered the question carefully, drawing on both her individual memories and the vast experience base of the collective consciousness. I'm still Sarah Chun, she said finally, but I'm also more than I was. I can think with the combined intelligence of billions of minds while still making decisions based on human values and intuition. I'm exactly what this situation required, a bridge between two forms of consciousness. Queen Vexera's skin patterns displayed what Sarah now recognized as profound relief and gratitude. Captain Chun, you have given us something we had lost, the ability to see problems from completely new perspectives. And you have given your species something unprecedented, a permanent representative within our collective consciousness. As the integration process stabilized, Sarah felt herself settling into a new form of existence. She remained fundamentally human in her values and decision-making approaches, but she now had access to knowledge and perspectives that span galaxies and millennia. She could think as an individual or as part of a collective, switching between modes of consciousness as the situation required. Most importantly, she had helped develop a solution to a threat that could have destroyed all conscious life in the galaxy. The Void Plague could be countered, not through force or superior technology, but through cooperation between different forms of consciousness. This is just the beginning, Sarah said, her voice carrying the confidence of both individual determination and collective wisdom. Now we have to convince the rest of the galaxy to trust us with their survival. Queen Vexera's 4 arms moved in what Sarah now understood was the Zephyrian equivalent of a smile. I believe, Captain Shun, that your species' talent for the impossible will prove equal to that challenge as well. Sarah had removed her helmet completely, abandoning not just conventional thinking, but conventional consciousness itself. In doing so, she had become something new, a hybrid consciousness capable of bridging the gap between individual creativity and collective wisdom. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would humanity's place in it.